I'm 81 years old now, and there's a strange kind of silence that comes with reaching this age. Not the silence of an empty room, not the silence of living alone. I mean the silence that settles in when people stop asking what you think. It took me a long time to understand the difference. For years, I told myself my children were just busy. They had jobs, families, mortgages, responsibilities. Life moves fast when you're in the middle of it. I remembered that from my own younger days. So when my phone rang less often, I understood. When holidays became shorter visits, I understood. When decisions were made without me, I told myself I understood that too. But understanding something doesn't stop it from hurting. And sometimes what hurts most isn't that your children disagree with you. It's realizing they no longer respect you. Respect isn't obedience. I learned that a long time ago. Children grow up. They become their own people. They make choices you wouldn't make. That's normal. Respect is different. Respect is feeling that your voice still matters even when nobody follows your advice. Respect is being seen. And when it disappears, it usually doesn't disappear all at once. It fades quietly. The way a photograph fades when it's left in the sunlight, you don't notice it day by day. Then one afternoon, you look at it and realize the colors are almost gone. I wasn't always an old man sitting in a quiet house. There was a time when everyone came to me. I was the one solving problems, the one working overtime, the one paying bills, the one making decisions when things got difficult. My children grew up believing their father had answers. I won't pretend I was perfect. I wasn't. I missed school plays. I missed dinners. I spent too many evenings exhausted in a chair while they were still awake. Back then I thought sacrifice automatically translated into love. I thought providing was enough. I thought there would always be time later for everything else. That assumption follows a man longer than he expects. There would always be another weekend, another vacation, another conversation, another year, until one day there isn't. The first sign I noticed wasn't dramatic. It was small, almost invisible. I would tell a story, and halfway through, someone would pull out a phone, not because the story was terrible, not because they hated me. They simply weren't interested. Years earlier, they would have listened, maybe politely, maybe impatiently, but they listened. Now I could feel their attention drifting away before I finished speaking. At first, I blamed technology. Everyone blames technology. But eventually, I realized something uncomfortable. People make time for voices they value. The second sign came when advice became something they tolerated instead of considered. Again, this isn't about agreeing. My father gave me advice I ignored plenty of times, but I still respected him enough to think about it. My children reached a point where they had already decided my opinion wasn't relevant before hearing it. I would begin a sentence and see it happen. A look, a sigh, a subtle shift in expression. Not anger, not disagreement, dismissal. That's a painful thing to witness, especially when it comes from people you carried on your shoulders, people whose bicycles you taught them to ride, people whose nightmares you sat through in the middle of the night. I remember one afternoon sitting at my daughter's kitchen table. Everyone was discussing a financial decision. I had experience in that exact area, 40 years of it. I started to offer a thought. Nobody interrupted me. Nobody argued. They simply continued talking as though I hadn't spoken. The conversation moved right around me. I sat there holding my coffee cup, listening, waiting, realizing nobody had even noticed. That's when I understood something. Disrespect is often quieter than conflict. Conflict at least acknowledges your existence. Being ignored does not. The third sign was when promises became optional. People who respect you generally care about keeping their word. Not every time. Life happens. Things come up. I understand that. But when canceled plans become routine, when forgotten commitments become normal, something has changed. I noticed it gradually. We'll come visit next weekend. Then they didn't. We'll call on Sunday. Then they forgot. We'll stop by soon. Soon became months. What made it difficult wasn't the missed visits. It was the realization that disappointing me no longer seemed important. When someone respects you, your disappointment carries weight. When they don't, it becomes background noise. I spent years making excuses for everyone. Maybe I still do. Old fathers become experts at excuses. We create them because the truth is harder. The fourth sign appeared when jokes started carrying sharp edges. Families tease each other. Mine always did. A little teasing can be affectionate, but there is a line. And once respect begins fading, that line starts moving. Comments become slightly more cutting. Embarrassing stories get told at your expense. Mistakes become entertainment. You laugh because everyone else is laughing. But inside, something feels different. I remember a family gathering where one of my sons kept making jokes about how outdated I was. Everyone laughed, including me, at least on the outside. But driving home afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Not because the jokes were cruel, because nobody seemed concerned whether they hurt. There's a difference. Respect doesn't mean never joking. Respect means remembering the person underneath the joke. The fifth sign was harder to admit. Important family decisions started happening without me, not because I demanded control. I never wanted control. I wanted inclusion. There is a difference. Houses were bought. Moves were planned. Major life changes were discussed. And often, I learned about them afterward, like reading yesterday's newspaper. Information arrived after the story was already finished. I would hear phrases like, "We didn't want to bother you," or "We knew you'd worry." Maybe they believed those reasons. Maybe sometimes they were even true. But eventually, I recognized another possibility. My perspective simply wasn't considered valuable enough to seek. That realization sits heavily on an old man's chest, heavier than he likes to admit. The sixth sign was when boundaries became one-sided. Respect works both ways. Healthy relationships require it. But I noticed something over the years. Everyone expected me to respect their schedules, preferences, opinions, and limits. And I did. Yet my own limits seemed negotiable. My own feelings seemed less important. Calls would come at inconvenient times when someone needed something. Requests would arrive without much consideration, but if I asked for a little time, a little attention, a little patience, it sometimes felt like an inconvenience. I don't think anyone intended to be selfish. Most people don't. The problem is that disrespect often grows from thoughtlessness rather than cruelty. That's what makes it so difficult to recognize. Nobody wakes up one morning and decides to stop respecting their father. It happens through hundreds of small moments, small choices, small assumptions, small neglects, until eventually the pattern becomes visible. The seventh sign was the hardest one, because it forced me to look at myself. I realized my children no longer feared losing me. Not physically, emotionally. There was a time when hurting me mattered, a time when disappointing me mattered, a time when distance between us felt uncomfortable to them. Over the years, that changed. Not entirely, but enough. Enough that weeks could pass. Enough that months could pass. Enough that I began feeling more like a relative than a father. And that's when I started asking questions I should have asked much earlier. How did we get here? What role did I play? Because life is rarely as simple as victims and villains, certainly not in families. The truth is, I spent decades teaching my children something without realizing it. I taught them work came first. I taught them productivity mattered more than presence. I taught them that being dependable meant suppressing your own needs. I taught them by example, not with words. Children learn far more from what they see than what they're told. They watched me choose work over conversations, responsibilities over relationships. future security over present connection. Again and again, year after year. I believed I was building a better life for them. In many ways I was, but I was also teaching lessons I never intended. By the time I recognized it, much of life had already passed. My wife saw it before I did. She usually saw things before I did. A few years before she died, she sat beside me on the porch one evening. The sun was setting. We weren't saying much. At our age, silence had become comfortable. Then she said something I'll never forget. She said, "You spent your whole life taking care of everyone, but not enough time being with them." I didn't argue, because I knew she was right. After she was gone, those words grew louder. The house became quieter. And quiet places have a way of amplifying truth. I've had years to think about respect, years to examine old memories, years to revisit conversations, and I've come to believe something important. When adult children lose respect for a parent, it isn't always because that parent failed. Sometimes it's because connection slowly weakened until respect had nothing solid left to stand on. Respect isn't maintained through sacrifice alone, or authority, or financial support. It grows through closeness, through shared time, through being known and being present. The painful part is that many parents realize this after retirement, after the children are grown, after habits have hardened, after opportunities have disappeared. I still love my children deeply. Nothing changes that. When they call, I'm happy. When they visit, I'm grateful. When I see their faces, I still see traces of the little boys and little girl they once were. Age doesn't erase that. If anything, it makes it stronger. But love and sadness can exist together. They often do. If you're listening to me and you're younger than I am, maybe you'll understand something I learned too late. The people we love rarely disappear all at once. Distance usually arrives quietly. Respect usually fades quietly. And time usually leaves quietly too. You don't hear it going. You just notice one day how much has already gone. At 81 years old, I don't spend much time wishing I were young again. I wouldn't want to repeat everything. But there are moments I would sit in longer. Conversations I would stay present for. Evenings I would protect instead of postpone. Because the things we assume will wait for us often don't. One day, your children become adults. One day, your parents are gone. One day, your house becomes quieter. One day, you realize the clock never slowed down, not even for a minute. And then all that's left is gratitude for what remains and sorrow for what doesn't. Both belong together. They always have. If this meant something to you, hold on to the people who still answer when you call. Listen when they speak. Let them know they matter while they can still hear it. As for me, I'll finish this evening the way I finish most evenings now. Sitting in my chair, looking out the window, thinking about the life that passed faster than I expected, thinking about the people I love, and accepting that some things can still be cherished even after they've already begun to fade.